Well, thanks for the introduction. I'm now thoroughly intimidated with a list of luminaries and scientists and brilliant folks in the room. So I'm just an energy guy, but I'll do my best. Thanks again for having me here tonight. I think this is your 4th annual conference. I'm sure there'll be many more because these issues aren't going away anytime soon. It's my pleasure to participate in the event. It's important. I'm also encouraged that you want to address the obvious nexus of water, energy, and climate. I'm proud to be in a company that also recognizes that nexus. We're called in Veolia Environment for a reason. We're an environmental company. We work at that focal point, and again, proud to do it. So why are we all in this room? I think there's a recognition growing. It exists, but it's growing. The community of people that get it recommend that these fundamental elements of life here on Earth, of water, energy, and climate, are beginning to impact the everyday life of even the most privileged among us. That's us, the spoiled people. I dare say no one doubts that it's going to affect, or has the potential to affect, the security and prosperity of our children. I say that because I usually speak to older crowds. But with some of the younger folks here, you will have children. And you'll worry about them too, like I worry about mine. And it's also a fact that for millions of people today, never mind the future, these issues pose an increasing challenge. They pose real-life challenges, and those will only get worse unless we do something about it. So, and moving forward, I'm sure you guys will talk about this tomorrow and going forward. In the past, I think a lot has been focused on mitigation, and now there's more people talking about adaptation, and it's really got to be both. There's not going to be any silver bullets. We are going to have climate impacts. We are going to challenge our water supplies. We are going to stretch our energy supplies. The question becomes, we need to mitigate and adapt as we move forward so that we cause the least harm, ultimately. The answers will come from a broad spectrum. It'll be new technologies. It'll be better use of existing technologies. It'll be evolutionary and maybe revolutionary change in consumer behaviors, we hope. There'll be new science. There'll be good policy. I say good. I think to hope for great is too much to ask, but we'll hope for good policy. So with that, let me just, before I move on, just a simple image. As I was kind of preparing for this, and I just thought to go, I was looking at satellite images, and you take a satellite image of the global, the Indian subcontinent, and you do on a day, and you do on at night. So in the day, what do you see? You look down on the Himalayas, and you see white, okay? Ice and snow, water storage. You see just south of the Himalayas, green, okay? So, the rains, also the outflow of dams, okay? Then you look to the west, to the stands, and you see brown, as if that region didn't have more to fight over, okay? Now you just overlay, and then you flip to the nighttime view, and you see that what 50 years ago was dark is now lit up bright. So between water and energy and climate in places like that, which are critically important, that's part of the issue is going to be, we'll think about our own turf, but it's really a global issue, and we're all intertied now. It's just, it's a compelling issue we need to deal with. So now just for a bit of expectation management, I don't have the answers. So I'll try to, I'm going to hit you with some facts that highlight some of the nexus of these issues. I've got you right where I want you. You're captive. You've eaten. You've had copious amounts of wine. So you're all kind of happy right now. So this is good. I'll try not to put you to sleep as well. All right, so I'll start with water. We'll just start with water before we go on from there. A couple of statements, one 20 years ago, one 300 years ago. National Geographic, the statement that you hear now, all the water that will ever be is right now. So finite resource, right? And then you get the old Benjamin Franklin founding father wisdom. When the well is dry, we know the worth of water, right? So anyway, so I'll start off with that. So what makes up the Earth's water resource? 97% of the Earth's water is ocean, largely unusable to us. at least in a economical way at this point. 2% in frozen in ice caps, glaciers, and snow. We'll come back to that when we talk about climate. Another small portion exists in salty inland seas, lakes, soil moisture, the atmosphere, which leaves 1% left for us to use, for domestic use, okay? This small portion of Earth's supply of water, usable water, 1%, is in underground reservoirs, groundwater. Another small amount in lakes, surface water, and the smallest amount is in rivers. And oh, by the way, that 0.0001 or 1/10,000% of the usable water that's in rivers is where we obtain most of our water. Okay? So, note to file, power plants drink heavily from rivers. So we'll come back to that. The supply is unevenly distributed across the Earth's surface. And for example, in Malaysia, 100 people share each million cubic meters of water. Okay? So in Malaysia, 100 people share it. In India, 350 people share it. In Israel, 4,000 people share it. Okay? So it's not distributed in any type of homogeneous, fair, economic, whatever you want to call it. The globe knows no boundaries, right? It's just the planet Earth. By 2050, the world's population, as you know, is supposed to be at 9 billion, up from 7. And according to the United Nations, that water use continues to expand at more than 2x the rate of population growth. So we're going to go from 7 to 9 billion, and water use grows twice as fast. The industrialization of the world, the creation of middle classes all over the world, as we've seen the miracle of China and India. It's a great thing for people to come out of poverty and join the middle class. They also become consumers at a much higher level, so something to be dealt with. Speaking of China, the water table under Beijing is sinking by 6 feet a year. I don't know, have any of you guys been to Beijing lately? As if they didn't have enough problems with the environment, huh? The coal plants are an issue, the air is tough to breathe, and the water table is sinking 6 feet a year under Beijing, okay? The vast Ogala aquifer, which runs through 8 states, basically runs from Texas up to the Dakotas, which is a huge resource for a water-scarce area, is dropping 3 feet a year, okay? And then I'll come back to fracking, but gas exploration is going to tax that as well. So there's copious amounts of water used in those regions and in a place where we're already scarcity. So lots of challenges. So who are the culprits on the waterfront? Irrigation, okay, top culprit. 17% of the world's crops are grown through irrigation, yet they produce 33% of the world's food. So that's why we do it, okay? Irrigated land is 2.5 times as productive as non-irrigated land. It's not going to end anytime soon. Unfortunately, the majority of the water never reaches the crops. And I'm generous saying majority. So that would mean 50% reaches the crops. It's worse than that. 85% of the water consumed in the U.S. is through irrigation. Okay? And half of the world's irrigation is in 3 countries. Take a wild guess. U.S., China, India. Okay? Yet irrigation is facing a competitive challenge for low-cost, high-quality water, which is a nice segue into my next point. So why is water so cheap? Is it priced right? I mean, I think it is obviously, I'm talking to experts here, so I'm not surprising many people in the room, but from an industrial side, from the guy who's trying to run power plants and feed district energy systems, water prices vary drastically. And fundamentally, the prices do not reflect the all-in cost of water. They don't. The energy business, if you look at the cost of an electron, has done I'll call it much better job at pricing in the cost of energy. I'm an energy guy. My water colleagues might debate this with me, but I think they generally agree. So there's direct cost, there's a financial cost, building wastewater treatment plants, pumping stations, pipes. There's environmental costs, waste generated from water processing, degradation of return streams, fertilizer, runoff from irrigation. And then there's resource cost. What is the cost when you deplete a resource? Okay? You can price the dam. Can you price the drought? Harder to do, particularly when it's on the other side of a border of your enemy. Okay? So pricing is a challenge that's got to be solved. Water has got to be priced at a level that will drive consumption, that will drive decision making. For example, in the developed world, Germany compared to the U.S., 4 times the cost of water, domestic water in Germany is U.S. And it's not because fundamentally their processes are less efficient, it's because they priced it that way. The Europeans, since I work for a French company and I work with my European colleagues frequently, there's places where we're way ahead of them. There's places where they've been way ahead of us from a policy and incentive perspective. And you can argue that. You can argue both sides of the fence. Are incentives good? Are they bad? Do they create bad behaviors? But they certainly have made some efforts, in particular in this area of pricing water, differently than we have. There's widespread subsidies. Farming. What a shock. Another farming subsidy. I thought I knew of every farming subsidy there was. But I just then realized after doing some research here that, in fact, it's a heavy subsidy because of the water. Huge discounts on the water used for irrigation. Again, back to my satellite view of this Indian subcontinent. So basically, China and Nepal own the ice, the water storage. India owns the water and the dams, and everybody else waits in line. So it's an interesting concept of ultimately this pricing factor, who controls the resource, how will it be distributed, is interesting. And demand-side management strategies, with and without pricing. Evidence shows, and I think I read a paper from a Professor Olmsted from Yale, actually, and it was a Yale-Harvard collaboration. Or actually, I'm from Boston, so I should say a Harvard-Yale collaboration. And they talked about the pricing elasticity of water, in other words, or the lack thereof. And, for non-economist speak, that means you make the price higher and people will use just as much. I don't buy it. And their study says they don't buy it either. There's evidence that, there is direct correlation between pricing of water and its use. Great examples. We were talking at the table tonight about, just consumer behaviors and competition. Water bills went up in my town substantially. And then my neighbor had to let me know, he basically, and of course, I'm a water hog. I've got sprinklers on my lawn. My community is all green grass, guilt-ridden. But my neighbor told me how much he had tweaked down his sprinklers and got his bill cut by like 40%. I'll be damned if he was going to beat me. Okay? So I was out there tuning my sprinklers, watching every patch of the grass, getting it right down, tolerating a few brown spots. So there is, pricing does matter, even in a microcosm like that. I can tell you, we own and operate district energy systems across the U.S. with the largest portfolio of plants in the U.S. And on average, in cities, we're the number 1 or 2 customers. So again, energy is water intensive. Okay, and I'll come back to that. But we're also experiencing double-digit increases in water pricing routinely in many cities. Trust me, all of my managers have in their objectives ways to squeeze down water use. Pricing matters. As I think about it, particularly for in-city generators, which tend to be smaller generators, they don't necessarily benefit from pricing support on the electricity side because they're in-city. It depends which market you sit in. But for them, the percentage of their non-fuel costs that are being chewed up by water continues to grow and grow and grow. And it becomes a competitive issue for in-city generators. bottom line, the politics of raising water prices and eliminating subsidies are difficult. It comes down to a lot of it is politics. You talk about the concept of water rights. What does that mean? Every earthling, right, has a basic right to a quantity of water. And I like to say earthling. I don't like human. Human, then I start comparing myself to other, we're all creatures on the earth. So I like earthling. So every earthling should have a right to a certain amount of water, right, to survive. What happens when you go above that inalienable right to be able to get a glass of water? Should you pay more for it? Is it a luxury? Why don't we treat it like a luxury? We don't, bottom line. So, it's got to happen. Something else struck me. It's funny, as I was reading this, I earlier in my lead-in, I called these basic elements, water, energy, and climate. And didn't a Greek guy reference this like a few thousand years ago? Wasn't it water, fire, air, and what was the other one? I guess earth. Earth, right? Aren't we still talking about those? Water, fire, and air, water, energy, climate. So interesting jump ahead a few thousand years in time. So moving to the macroeconomic risks. Look, go to the big picture. The World Economic Forum recently rated the the next decade's 50 global risks in 5 different sectors. So typical risk, probability versus consequence. Water supply crisis rated number 1 or 2, depending on how you kind of looked at the numbers. 1 or 2 in the next decade. And it had great company at the top, okay? Major systemic financial failures. That can't happen, right? Chronic fiscal imbalances. So I was sitting with my son. I was reading through this with my 14-year-old, and he says, "Dad, did they mean Washington when they say that?" I had to say, no, that was number 6. That was chronic failure of nation states to deal with global issues. So anyway, so it had great company, but it's up there, and you have a world forum to look at critical issues, and there's pretty strong sense that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. My follow-on, after my son listened in on this, and we were talking through all these risks, my wife chimed in and said, "Oh, thank you for the nice bedtime story for William." This is basically, the sword of Damocles over our head. So how big is it, and what can be done? My colleague, Laurent Auguste, which some of you people know here, he's the CEO of our water business in the Americas, recently presented on the subject. So we commissioned a study, Veolia commissioned a study with the Food Policy Research Institute. So compared to today, by 2050, the number of people living in water-scarce areas will increase by 90%. Okay, so part of it is driven by demand scarcity. The other part is just where are people moving to? Where is the concentration of humans? There'll be 5 billion people by 2050 living in water-scarce regions. By 2050, the GDP produced in water-scarce areas increased by 520%. And again, you look at it, and fundamentally, it's places like India and China. That's $63 trillion worth of GDP that will shift into water-scarce regions. Part of what this Growing Blue initiative is, which water interests are looking at around the world, is to try to figure out sustainable approaches to growing blue, growing with water in mind. And there's many existing, the tools are there. So part of the study was to figure out, okay, so that's the future. Not 520% increase shift in GDP to water-scarce areas. What can we do about it? Through existing technologies, known policies, known protocols, we could de-risk $17 trillion worth of that pretty easily. That's the size of the U.S. economy. Okay? So, part of what you guys will be figuring out, not me, I'll have my little piece of it, but you guys will be the type of think tanks that figure this out, is to not only figure out the new technologies and the new policies, what do we already have? What do we already have, and what should we be using? So now let's move on. We'll add energy to the water mix. Water is energy intensive itself. So the cycle to extract, transport, treat, distribute is very energy intensive. Energy costs can represent 75% of the processing and distribution costs of municipal water. So 75% of the cost of water is chewed up by the energy to move it around. Many cities, between 30 and 50% of their entire municipal budget is chewed up by the energy to move water around or to treat water. Okay, so 50% of municipal budgets are just on the energy piece of water. Yet too few cities have really sought ways to reduce this expense, and for not good reasons. I mean, if you look at, I know, since we have steam districts in many urban centers in the U.S., you know, so you talk in Boston, I talk with the folks in New York, Philly, Baltimore, St. Louis, Kansas City, you go down the list, Chicago. One of the biggest problems for our districts is water leaks, spilling over onto our energy infrastructure. The infrastructure is crumbling. The staffs are, it's on demand. It's incredible. And it's a lot of this is low-hanging fruit. I don't know about if there's any other business folks in the room, but when I hear low-hanging fruit, I'm actually salivating right now, just thinking about it. You know, I mean, the amount of money that's hanging out there that these municipalities, with help, could go in and find, because they're not necessarily tooled up to find it, is extraordinary. You know, we've started a model. Jump to the energy industry for a minute. ESCOs. Everybody know what ESCOs are? Anybody know what ESCOs are? Okay, basically ESCOs are companies that go in and they'll say, we'll look at your office tower, we'll look at your campus, your hospital campus, your university campus. We will do upgrades to your equipment. We'll change out your lights, we'll change out your coolers, we'll invest that capital. And then when you show savings, we get a cut. That's how an ESCO works. So they come in, put their money on the table, and you share the cut on the savings. There's no WESCOs. They may be soon, but water has been treated differently, where we've focused a lot of time and efforts on negawatts, right, which is reducing watts. We haven't spent many on negadrops, okay? There just hasn't been much. It doesn't have the same level of penetration from industry to get in there and help out the municipalities, so that needs to come. We just actually, shameless plug, we just signed a contract with New York City just to do that, where our water division will go in, work with the city of New York. We're already doing it. We're identifying improvements. We'll drive through, do those improvements, and then get a cut of the savings. So it makes sense. So, and then the final thing I want to talk about here when we talk about nexus, before I move on to energy, is that it's fine to talk about the nexus of water and energy, particularly before we even get to climate. But what we run into a lot in industry is people don't buy things that way. So in other words, when I go to talk to a hospital or a town or a city, and I talk to the procurement people, and we say, hey, look, we're this great company. We do water, we do waste, we do energy. Says, stop talking energy. That's all I want to talk about. The other guy does water. You see that all the time. There's really just not a cohesive strategy on the procurement side of many organizations to figure out, how do I link these things? Do I get a better bang for a buck if I start linking these things up? So we need to figure that out. I mean, that's another kind of a process policy thing and companies only sell the way customers buy. I've seen too many times when we try to convince customers on how smart we are, and we have the better solution, and they go and buy from the other guy who sells them what they want. So the procurement side of how we look at water and energy needs to improve. So moving on to energy. The fundamentals of bulk electricity production have changed little in 50 years. The light bulbs are just finally starting to change, and that was how long ago, you know? And oh, by the way, I better get a big hand raise here. How many people have LED lights in their house here? Okay, and this crowd is as good as it gets, right? Okay, so 89% of electricity is generated from hydroelectric steam and water turbine cycles. That hasn't changed in more than 50 years, okay? We're finally now, you see more of combined cycle gas plants you hear. What that means is a gas turbine on the front end, a steam turbine on the back end. They're still water intensive. On average, it takes about 2 gallons of water per kilowatt hour to generate electricity, okay? And interestingly enough, it's about, for a conventional power plant, it's about 1/2 gallon. For a hydroelectric plant, it's about 18 gallons because of the evaporation. When you look at the evaporative effect of the bodies of water that are created by the dams, and then you look at the output on the sluiceways, and you look at the fallout, it's a very high evaporation rate. So it's kind of an interesting fact, but about 2 gallons per kW. Power generation uses 41% of the total domestic and commercial consumption. I'm sorry to kill you with so many numbers here, but again, I'm trying to give you some scale ideas. So almost half of the water used in the U.S. is chewed up by power plants. That's for domestic consumption. That's irrigation out. Remember, we already said irrigation is the big culprit, but after irrigation is carved out, that's domestic use. Half of that is used up by power plants. It's 4% of the total consumption, even when you look at irrigation. 54% of the total consumption, including irrigation, everything, is withdrawn by power plants. What does that mean? That means, I said earlier, power plants drink a lot from rivers and oceans. Okay, they need to cool. They have steam turbines, so you burn your fossil fuel, or for that matter, you have nuclear fission, and you ultimately make steam with that stuff. So you convert the energy to make steam, you run it through a turbine. You have to get that steam back so that it's a cycle. Otherwise, the amount of water use would be outrageous. So it's a closed cycle. But to cool that steam, you need more water. So you take water out of a river, water out of the ocean, or use a cooling tower. So fast forward the tape to climate. So 54% of the water withdrawn is from power plants. You know what happens when river levels get low? Power plants have to derate. When river water temperatures get high enough, the EPA throws you out. They shut your plant down. So this is going to be an interesting challenge, and I'll give you an example of it in a bit, but where climate will then roll in on top of water use. Even if it's returned, the resource is going to be challenged, and what's it going to do to the power gen sector? It's going to be very interesting. And as we see, let me roll there right now. So you have this challenge also where there's environmental impact from that thermal plume. So to cool all that steam, if you're an ocean plant or a river plant, you take cold water in and put hot water back out. The fish larvae don't generally like that. They die. And you've heard enough about fishery issues to know that that's a sensitive subject. That's now was an externality, but now it's working its way in. So what there's more and more of is we're shifting from withdrawal, simple cycle, once through cycle power plants to plants with big nuclear-esque cooling towers, okay? Because they heat the air instead of heating the bodies of water. Well, guess what they do? They use a lot more water. So actually the trade-off we're making for another environmental reason, which is the marine biota, marine deaths caused by thermal flumes, is going to cause us to use a lot more water. I'll give you an example. Another thing that, cooling, we're addicted to air conditioning in the U.S., right? Entirely. I mean, most buildings you go in the summer, it's 65 degrees. My French colleagues, drives them crazy because they don't do air conditioning. Europe just generally doesn't do a lot of it. The Middle East is trying to catch up with us, by the way. They're building cooling plants like they're going out of style. But for example, we have a plant in Boston. It's affiliated with Harvard Medical School and all the teaching hospitals over in the Longwood Medical area of Boston. So it's a sizable cooling water plant, 40,000 tons of cooling, which is how it's measured. And it just heats those 5 hospitals, cools those 5 hospitals. It evaporates about 1.5 million gallons a day of water up the cooling towers. And that's a small plant, compared to one of these big hyperbolic towers for a big coal plant, big nuke plant, whatever. And every roof, from an air conditioning perspective, you go up on the towers, when you're in the towers in New York, you look down on the roofs, what do you see? Cooling towers everywhere. Our consumption of water related to air conditioning is continuing to grow, and that grows around the world. Europe didn't do it because their buildings are old enough. Middle East is new, and guess what? China's getting to like air conditioning too, and India will probably like it as well because it's available. So that's going to be another new whole demand perspective on water use and energy use, because making cold air is also very energy intensive. The situation, so I've described some of the issues in the U.S. It's worse in water-scarce areas. For example, India. Again, you take India. I keep coming back to that. A recent report by the World Resources Institute notes that nearly 80% of India's future power plants will be located in water-scarce or water-stressed areas. Developing countries have the right to grow, and whether it's a right or not, they're going to do it. What's going to happen? The stress that it induces will be. I guess we'll find out what it will be. That's the only way to look at that. High electricity costs also prohibits the feasibility of desalination plants. We all like to look at the oceans and say, hey, tons of water, but the cost of desal is still very high. There's some emerging technologies, but it's still, at the end of the day, very energy intensive. And oh, by the way, you create the water on the coasts. You still got to get the water inland. So again, just more energy intensive infrastructure. Deep aquifer production, long distance pipelines, interbasin transfer. The cost of electricity, the cost of energy to move that water may be prohibitive to some of those technologies. It just won't be cost effective. So what can be part of the story on this energy front? We talked about combined heat and power. So you look at the energy industry in 50 years has gone from electricity generation, has gone from 30% efficient to 50%, 50 years. So yeah, it's not bad, right? It's basically one technology, combined cycle gas turbine plants. Yet we have this other technology called combined heat and power. Okay, it used to be called cogen, now it's combined heat and power. They changed the name, it's the same concept. Okay, you burn a fuel, you make electricity by turning a turbine, for example, like a gas turbine, and then instead of having the hot gases that come out of the back end of the turbine go up a stack, you actually use those to heat cities, heat buildings. It's 85% efficient. So I'll tell you the tale of Denmark for a minute. Okay, so Denmark decided back in the 90s that they were on an unsustainable trajectory. Okay, they were energy dependent, totally energy dependent. They thought it would affect their GDP substantially when they looked at basically the gas problems of the world. So they decided to go a different route. They said, you know what? Combined heat and power is going to be a big part of our story. And now 98% of the buildings in Copenhagen are attached to a district energy system that's fed by a combined heat and power plant. Almost 70% of every structure in Denmark is attached to a combined heat and power plant. Those are 85% efficient. And this technology has been around an awful long time. Since 1990, their greenhouse gas profile has gone down 15%, while their GDP went up 40%. So you don't have to pay on both ends. You can have it both ways with some existing technologies. In the US, for example, we invented district energy. So all these big urban piping networks that were built by the utilities the first ones were built in the US. All your major cities, Boston, as I said, Boston, New York, Philly, Baltimore, you name it, they're all sitting there. But what has changed a lot since the day is that a lot of these are fed by big combined heat and power plants. So in each one of those cities I just named, more than half of the energy that heats those downtowns is otherwise would have gone up a cooling tower or into a river, other than the fact for combined heat and power. But how many people knew that? We don't even talk about it. It's an old technology that can take huge bites out of carbon emissions. So why aren't we doing it? Are there any utility executives in the room? Other than me? Can you turn the tape off at this point? I mean, the main barriers that are in the way are it's utility reform. I mean, you have the regulated pipes and wires utilities that, I'll talk at deregulated environments, so where most of our people live and where most of our energy gets produced. They got forced to sell off the power plants, and they were left with transmission and distribution. Where do you use combined heat and power? You don't use it out in every household yet. So you look for energy-dense fields where there's lots of energy in a compact area. Hospitals, universities, office towers, industrial sites. Who do you think the utilities want to least lose? So the barriers that are still in place are most of these utilities, when the deal was done, when they were forced to sell off their power plants, the quid pro quo was they got exclusive franchise rights to run wires and streets. So as you're a hospital, you're a college, you want to put in a combined heat and power plant, you want to take advantage of this, from an economic perspective, social responsibility, yada, yada, you can't connect your campus unless you don't have to cross the street. Good luck. And these battles have gone on for years. I mean, interesting one with Harvard. Harvard is trying to expand a part of their campus from Cambridge over into the Boston side. And they wanted to basically build a microgrid, plop cogens in there, smart buildings, the whole deal. And the local utilities said, that's not going to work. That's our right. That's our franchise rights. And and the bottom line is the economics of combined heat and power. Part of it is you're more efficient, so you burn less fuel. The other part is you're making your own electricity. You don't have to buy it from the utility, so you don't have to pay transmission and distribution charge. That's the big economic turning point, particularly as gas prices have gone down. It costs more for T&D than it does for the electrons, okay? Generally in most locations. So if you have to use the utilities wires, guess what? You still got to pay T&D. I ran the unregs, the unregulated businesses of a utility, and it was these type of businesses, combined heat and power, district energy. So I kind of know the deal from their side of the table, and it's a fear of basically Swiss cheesing their prime customers, and that's got to end. I mean, it's got to end. We've got to find ways to do that, and it's tough as a utility executive because they've got, they want to be socially responsible. They also have shareholders, and there's nothing in the stock that talks about, particularly in the next quarter stock, that talks about greenhouse gas, water use, energy efficiency. It's just not there yet. It's coming, but it's been slow. So this whole, the whole combined heat and power story is really, it's a sad story. It should be much more ubiquitous. And we do our best. We try to promote it, which I'll take to the next part of what I want to talk about. So would any energy discussion be full without talking about fracking, right? Okay? Natural gas in the U.S. is an absolute game changer. Okay? It's turning everything on its ear, combined heat and power included. And I don't know where you guys sit on the science. I mean, it's all over the place. But generally, the science that I've read, maybe I'm biased, is telling me that all those molecules are coming out of the ground one way or another. We'll figure out the water issues. Maybe it'll be dry fracking instead of wet fracking. We'll figure out the methane leakage issue. But they're coming out of the ground. So if they're coming out of the ground at the price points that everybody sees, because we're sitting on an ocean of gas in the U.S., it's huge. And we're just finding out more and more reserves every time we stick a drill in the ground somewhere else. We're either going to smother out some of these other opportunities, or we're going to figure out how to deal with them with policy. So it's going to be a challenge. I guess it's also worthy of note that part of the fracking, I mentioned dry fracking, for example, a 2007 study in the Fort Worth, Texas area, dry already. 7 to 13% of the area groundwater would be consumed to liberate the local shale gas reserves. That's a big chunk. So again, I mean, there's compelling reasons for the gas to come out of the ground. We see it right now, this huge industrial shift of production to the U.S. right now. You hear about some of the new chemical plants being built, some of the new fertilizer plants being built, but what you don't hear is that where there's already plants where they had idled production, they're ramping that production up. There's a lot of reasons why it's good for us to have gas in the U.S. You call it energy security, economic benefit, carbon reduction, because the coal plants are shutting down. They're dead. There's a lot of good reasons, but we still need to figure out part of the picture. I mean, we have one coal plant left, and it's basically got 3 years of life left in it. We've got our gas conversion plant set up, but we were doing coal gas price swapping last summer. Just purely on existing economics, gas is cheaper than coal. So it's real. Before I flop over to Climate, a couple of tidbits. Hopefully, I won't go on too much longer. I hope I'm not losing you here. But again, while we're talking about fracking and water and energy, we might as well talk a little bit about Canadian tar sands, right? Got to talk about them. Half a barrel of water per barrel of oil produced. Okay, I'll leave out the energy part. We'll just talk about the water part of it. As the government has tried to figure out, because the data is not good, which I'm going to end on some of that. That's part of my discussion point. The government's trying to figure out what really are all the costs associated with this nexus. And a 2007 Sandia National Lab study indicates that end-to-end energy production accounts for 25% of all consumption of water. So earlier I was saying it was 4%, because that's what the numbers tell you right now. When you really look at, because that doesn't include mining, that doesn't include all the real end-to-end, it probably jumps up closer to 25% of our water is used for energy production. So inextricably linked. So moving on to climate now, to add to this noxious brew. Altered global hydrological cycles. What does that mean? That means areas that are water stressed today will face even greater impacts in the future. Uncertainty over future weather patterns impacts decades-long life cycle of planned infrastructure. This is an interesting point to me. So we already know that municipalities are strained, that infrastructure investment is difficult to do. And then now we come to find out that because we really don't understand the climate, we may have put the stuff in the wrong place. Or that we might have to deal with warmer summers and increased storm size. So are we really even designing and building and maintaining our infrastructure correctly? I know there's a lot of focus in some of the Northeast cities on sea level rise. I know no one's house is getting inundated, but many of our cities, their critical infrastructure is already getting licked by tidal waters underground. And it won't take much to make it a lot worse. So a lot more cities are getting interested in that. So what if, I'm just going to run through these quickly because I know I've been talking probably longer than I should. But so what if, as predicted, we talk about climate, right? Tons of science out there. This red tie, really it's not political affiliation. It was for the Red Sox. But, both sides of the aisle, the crazy stuff goes around. But what if it's true? I mean, what if it is? Increased temperatures, increased evaporation rates, and decreased water availability. Decreased precipitation for low and mid latitudes. Increased drought, floods, storms, change resource variability to the point we don't understand it. Rising sea levels, impact on fresh water. Shrinking snow cover. It never occurred to me that when you look at like the Rocky Mountains, that's water storage. What happens if the storage is in there? That means a lot to the West. Because if you don't have dams to store it, it runs off quicker than you can use it. So it's just interesting. River levels, flows, temperatures. I already talked about what that can mean to disruption of power generation. And water shortages in cities could restrict our ability to heat, cool, and electrify buildings. So what if this is all true, right? I was out at a conference in California a couple weeks ago, and the Wall Street Journal does it every year. It's called Economics. So George Shultz was up there speaking, okay? So, the Secretary of everything. I guess he was what? He was labor, he was state, and defense, right? I think it was defense. Anyway, he's got to be in his 90s, still sharp as a tack. But he brought up an interesting example. He went back to the Reagan days, and it was about CFCs, okay? We thought the ozone, remember the ozone layer, that whole thing? Some of you guys remember it, some others you don't. So there was a lot of science that said the ozone layer is going to be gone, we're all going to be cooked, we're all going to get skin cancer, crop failure, blah, blah, blah. Lots of science on both sides. And so Schultz described this conversation that they had, and Reagan was sitting there listening to his side of the aisle, a bunch of guys saying, it's BS, the science isn't there, we're not doing it. And he said, you know what? He said, is there even the slightest possibility that it might be true? Can we concede that? It might be true. And so grudgingly, some of the heads. And he said, well, why don't we just buy an insurance policy? Why wouldn't we buy an insurance policy if it could happen? what I thought about was compelling about that is many times we have these discussions, particularly when you open these discussions up to the broader public. We talk about carbon capture, sequestration, cap and trade. Nobody gets it. Only experts get it, and then maybe they get it. But when you talk about an insurance policy, doesn't everybody get that? I mean, do we all buy insurance? Yep. To do what? To protect ourselves and our kids. For what? For the obvious that's going to happen? Is my house going to burn down? Am I going to, am I going to die of a heart attack tomorrow? Maybe not, but I might. I thought it was a compelling idea, the idea of insurance, and that, as we also try to take whatever policies to the people, because it's so politicized, some simple thoughts like that. We're talking about insurance here. If you had to tell everybody in the U.S. that they had to pay $500 a year to potentially protect their grandchildren from the type of calamities we're talking about, they might say, okay, I get it, it's insurance. Maybe not, but I just thought it was an interesting point he brought up. So now that I've thoroughly depressed you by outlining this seemingly grim future, I'm pleased to inform you, as you all know, there's practical solutions out there. There will be new technologies. There will be new policies. I'm not going to go through them. You know what they are. There's tons of studies out there on them. So I want to just close with a focus on one thing. Focus on consumers. Because I think we've become over-reliant, and don't take this the wrong way because I know a lot of you guys are working on technology, but we've become a bit over-reliant on the technology side and the government policy side. Government will save us, they'll figure it out, they'll come up with the right answers. Technology will save us. What about us using less and being really serious about that? So let me start with a few questions. Why can I check my stocks, my bank account to the penny, my Facebook friends or unfriends as it may be, my LinkedIn requests of old friends looking for jobs, the weather, on and on, blah, 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 right on my smartphone, anytime I want. Yet, I can't tell if my kid left my plasma TV on. I can't tell if I forgot to turn the heat down to 58 when I left, even if I did or did not. Why is that?
That's coming.
It's coming, but why is it taking so long? Okay? Why is it that the only people who have that data right now are the ones selling you that stuff? Okay? So, again, my car can tell me my instantaneous, my marginal fuel use, right? As I go up and down on the gas meter, I go in and out of cruise control. I can't tell how much, I have no idea inside my house, nor does the utility, because all they have is one meter at the house or the office tower or the factory. You can't tell what's going on. A CFO, again, can track every penny. The flows of money are well tracked. The flows of kilowatt hours or gallons, you can't tell. We've got to get there faster. And I'll leave you with another thought. Some of the younger folks at my table, which was taken as a compliment, grew up in a data-rich world. They're comfortable with data. They love data. They're data junkies, right? Give them data. Behaviors will change. I had a quick discussion with my boy. I was thinking about this. I said, so here's the deal. What if on your phone you could see how much all the electricity in the house we were using and the water we were using, and if it went down, I gave you a 10% cut. He said, when can I get it? I mean, we could turn these into little Wesco warriors, all these data-driven kids in a minute. I'm telling you, you get them the technology, you give them the data, they do it. And that's what a kid can do. Imagine what a society could do with that kind of data. So I think really, what is it? We haven't unleashed the awesome power of the information technology revolution on these most fundamental areas of societal challenge. We just have not. We've focused it on things like Facebook, things like LinkedIn. That has got to change. Now it is coming. I mean, there's new companies out there. I mean, there's a company like Old Power that's out there where you'll be able to check on your smartphone and you'll be able to see what your house is doing. Challenge. I was just talking with the guy from Old Power. It's great, but he's just reading the utility meter. First thing, and you don't have any granularity. It's one thing to know what your house uses. How much does that help you? Don't you want to know the difference between what my fridge uses, my boiler uses, my plasma TV uses, the hair dryers that should all be crushed and burned? I mean, we need to know that kind of stuff, and it's not that hard. The technology exists. So then, moving on to my final set of questions. So I talked about my car can tell me how much I'm using for gas. Also, when I go to buy my car, I get an MPG sticker, right? Energy business did this pretty well with Energy Star ratings, right? I can buy my furnace, I can get Energy Star rating. My dishwasher's an Energy Star rating. Nothing out there for water use, right? You have no idea how much a product you buy uses for water. Take a guess how many gallons of water your pair of jeans is worth. Any idea? Someone throw out a guess.
50 gallons.
3,000. Okay, because you got to grow the crop, harvest the crop, make the jean, and then wash it a whole bunch of times. And that doesn't count the fact that you wash it with hot water, which you really probably don't need to. You compare that to a pound of beef. That's about 50 gallons. Again, got to grow the feed, irrigate the feed, to grow the feed, to feed the cow, then you got to feed blah, 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 blah. But we should have these type of labels. You should know from an energy and water perspective, as a consumer, what the hell am I getting? What am I buying? Why is it, I talked about this, why is it that, and oh, by the way, take it to another level. When I buy an office tower or a home or a factory, kind of big investments. Wouldn't you like to know? Particularly, as you guys are probably aware of, many cities are pursuing these labels on real estate right now. Okay, so Bloomberg did it in New York. Philly has followed suit. Boston's about to jump in. Seattle's going there, where every building is going to have an energy use sticker on it. You want to talk about scrambling going on right now with the REITs and individual property owners? Because if you get labeled, well, they're going to get labeled. When you get labeled as a dog, you're in trouble. Information, transparency is going to change behaviors. We need to get there quicker. So water departments, why are they understaffed? Right now, if you look at, in the U.S., I think it was the U.S. Geological Service did a study on water leakage out of domestic systems. The amount of water leaking out of our pipes in our domestic water systems equals 20% of the total demand. So forget about the fact that once you get it into your house and you squirt it out on the lawn. Just to get it to your house, we're already wasting 20% of the total use. So why is that? I talked about why can a CFO track every penny. Why is it that most people in this room don't have motion-activated lights in their house? Or why haven't they converted to LEDs? Why don't you have automatic timers on your showers? Why are you washing your clothes with hot water? You know why? Because basically we're blind as consumers. We're running blind on water and energy. Climate just becomes an exacerbator, but we are running blind. And as you guys think about technologies, think about the mitigation side, but please think about the consumer side. Okay, figure out ways to get this information in people's hands, because they will act out of self-interest, they'll act out of company interest, they may even act out of national interest at some point. Because if we don't, then what's left? If you don't act out of those, then what do you act out of? Crisis. That's it, right? It's not a foregone conclusion that we're going to have dislocation, starvation, wars over all of this stuff. It's not a foregone conclusion. That's how many things have changed in the past, right? So it's not a done deal that isn't going to happen. But the point is, particularly on this consumer side, when you look at the bite we can take out of demand just by having smarter consumers and really caring about conservation. And I think the caring will come with the transparency. I really do. Maybe maybe it's Pollyanna, but I don't think so. So anyway, we need more negawatts and more nega drops. I know you like that one. You going to use that one? All right. Thanks for your time and attention. And oh, by the way, you have till tomorrow at the end of business to solve all this stuff. And now I think I'm going to have a glass of wine.